Hello and welcome to Food Safety Fridays edition 122. My name's Simon Timpley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. It's lovely to be with you here today. We're delighted to say we've got Dr. David Rosenblatt from Share Consulting and Training with us again today to talk about auditing. Before we go over to David, I'll just a few housekeeping things. Today's, as ever, it is being recorded. You'll get a copy of the recording and slides and the certificate by email later. So don't worry if you miss anything. You can go back over it at your leisure later. Some of you already typing in the chat bar. Hello from Poland. It's too many to read. Iwa, Amis, good afternoon. Michael, Mark, Lawrence. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. Wherever you are, you're all very welcome. As you know, the Food Safety Fridays webinar program is sponsored. And before we go over to David, I'll play the ads, go over to David, say a quick hello, and then we'll get the show on the road. Okay, be back in a couple of minutes.
The world of food has changed a lot in the last 100 years. But one thing that doesn't change? Ensuring the quality and safe handling of food. No matter what changes are yet to come, we're proud to always be on our clients' side, shaping the future of food, today and tomorrow. AIB International, ever onward.
Okay. Thanks to the sponsor, Food Safety Fridays. Are you there, David? Can you switch your webcam on if you are? I know you are.
Hi, everybody. Yes.
Hi, David. Good to see you. Look at that in the sidebar, literally from all over the world. Have you been watching the chat rolling?
Yep. Really exciting.
Very exciting. Okay, let's not waste any time. Let's get the slides up and I'll be back later for the Q&A.
Okay. So, hello, everybody. My name is David, and I'm happy to be with you this Friday on Food Safety Fridays. It's a privilege for me to be able to participate in this program. I've been doing it for a few years now, about twice a year, so that's pretty exciting. What I want to do before I do my opening speech, and I have a speech for you today, I just want to get a feeling of who are the 335 people listening to me right now. So just go onto the poll sidebar and type in who you are. Do you perform audits? Are you an auditee? That means people perform audits on you, both or neither? Neither.
Okay, that poll's running in the sidebar. Can you see that, David? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Still voting. Still. You see how many votes people are in there now? I want everybody to vote.
We can't, unfortunately, we can't see that until afterwards in the stats.
Okay. So while you're doing your final votes, I want to say a few things about how amazing I think it is that 343 people from around the world take time off on Friday to sit down and learn and talk about food safety. That is just brilliant. I think you should all be very proud of yourselves. I think you should all give yourselves a round of applause. That's not an obvious thing, and if you're listening to this recorded, same thing. You're sitting down and listening to a recording of a food safety session. You want to learn more. You have a passion, and when we talk about auditing, it's especially true, because in my opinion, auditing is one of the most important elements of a food safety management system. And sometimes I become very passionate about this subject. I've been working as an auditor for years. I took my first auditor training in 1993. I have done hundreds and hundreds of audits, food safety audits and quality audits around the world in any type of organization throughout the food chain, literally from farm to fork. And I have also trained thousands of auditors, both internal auditors and lead auditors for food safety management systems, quality management systems, FSSC 22000, HACCP, BRC, IOP, Global Gap audits, and I think that if you are one of the 73%, three-quarters perform audits, because I added up, I perform audits and I both, which means you're also an auditee. If you do not love doing audits, then don't do them. It's okay. It's fine. There are enough people to do audits. If you don't love it, if you don't find a passion in it, if you don't wait to do the audit, anticipate it, and enjoy it greatly, you shouldn't be doing it, because you really have to, in order to do a good audit and to give real value, you really have to love what you're doing, in my opinion. This is my opinion. And for those of you who are auditees, which is 62%, I just added up, I'm an auditee in both. If you ever had an audit and you felt afterwards relieved that the auditor didn't find anything, or that you passed it well, you shouldn't be relieved. You should be very worried. If your auditor visited your facility and left without giving you substantial insight and diagnosis of what you should be doing better, then you should fire that person and get a better auditor. Now, I know there's some joy in passing an audit and say, hey, we didn't get any, but that's a false joy. It's not what you're paying for. And so remember, after an audit, you should feel that you have been thoroughly looked at. You should feel that, and you should feel, whoa. So that's, way back when I was working for a company called Best Foods, and Best Foods has since become Unilever years ago. I was QA manager for a food factory, 200 employees, 3 shifts a day, ambient, stable products. We had HACCP. Those days they didn't have ISO 22000 yet. It was just HACCP and ISO 9001. And I had a food safety audit by an auditor, a Best Foods auditor called Guy Royer from Belgium. And he blew my mind. It was the first audit I had with him. He blew my mind. I was like, oh my God, I want to be him. I want to be able to do what he does. I want to be able to go into an organization, ask the right questions, look at the right things, and diagnose what's wrong with that organization and save the day. An auditor has the power if the work is done professionally, we have the power to change the world, to make the world a safer place for people to eat, and that's exciting. I'm a veterinarian. I began studying medicine because I had an urge to heal and to help and to do something better. I had no idea going into school that there was a possibility of me being a food safety specialist. That's something I found out towards the end of my studies. And I am so grateful and so privileged to be able to do food safety as an occupation. I lost my presentation. Are we still there, Simon? Am I talking to myself?
I'm going to put it back up, David. There we go.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. And I think anybody who's sitting here on this Friday and taking time to talk about food safety should feel the same. It's a privilege, and I think that every single person on this earth deserves to be able to eat food without anything wrong happening to them, anything bad happening, and that's possible. It's not the case yet, and we have a lot of work to do. So let's go and learn how to be better auditors, and anybody who has anything interesting to say on the sidebar in the chat, and we're a lot of people, but I don't know if we're able to address every single comment, but the more the merrier. And so I'll let you proceed. And I want to start with two cases that are very, very unfortunate, very sad, both in HACCP certified organizations. The one is a listeria outbreak that killed 33 people in the United States from eating cantaloupe that had been contaminated. The New York Times wrote about this case. The farm had passed a food safety audit by an outside contractor just days before the outbreak began. The auditor had given the packing plant a score of 96 points out of 100. I read the FDA investigative report on this case, and there were things that auditor could have seen. This is from part of the investigation. Federal regulators cast blame on the farm's off-site packing facility. They said it was poorly designed, allowing water to pool on the floors. Its equipment was difficult to clean. Its new washer and dryer system had also been used on raw potatoes. The potatoes may have been decayed, promoting listeria growth. Growth of the pathogen was probably exacerbated by the farm's failure to pre-cool the cantaloupes. The company acknowledged that it had skipped a key step that pulls the heat from the cantaloupe before it is refrigerated, possibly contributing to condensation on moist surfaces that encourage listeria to grow. Now, I have done audits in the packing facilities and the agricultural sector, and I know how well organizations can prepare for an audit. But if you're a good auditor, there's no amount of preparation that can hide the kind of things that could have been seen in this case, which is why I'm furious with the fact that this organization had an audit and didn't have the benefit of somebody saying, hey, you're not doing your job well enough. And this is the reason why. Another case that is well known and has been well published is the Peanut Corporation of America PCA case from the end of 2008, beginning of 2009. Stu Parnell, the CEO, received 28 years prison for manslaughter in this case. They had an extraordinary audit being done at the time this was happening. Their level was considered to be superior. At that same time, the FDA came to investigate the plant. This is from the FDA report. After the case, observation 3. This is one of many observations, but it is so clear that it could have been seen in a good audit. It says failure to perform mechanical manufacturing steps so as to protect food against contamination. Specifically, this firm recognizes that roasting step as the control point for eliminating microbiological contamination in raw materials. So roasting was a CCP. However, the firm had not established the effectiveness of the temperature, volume, or belt speed specific to the roaster to ensure it is adequate as a kill step. In other words, there was no validation record shown. Additionally, the firm's records of the roaster's temperature are inadequate, and that dates have been left off of several circular recording charts. And here it goes on and says 3 days in August we're missing, and 3 days in September. But when it gets to December and January, and in December 2008 and January 2009, no temperature recording charts were dated. How is it possible to pass an audit with a superior outcome when you don't have validation of your main CCP? When you don't have monitoring records for 2 months in a row? It just seems crazy to me, and very, very upsetting. And it can happen to anybody if you're not careful. Now, I've done audits, and I know there have been food safety cases in organizations that I've been audited, and I've missed stuff, but nothing like that. And I think one of the reasons that, one of the things I do now that I'm more experienced, and people send me to audit mostly second-party audits. I was a third-party auditor for 4 years, working for a certification organization for food safety, but now I'm with a private company with share consulting and training, and most of the time I deal with training and learning, but I also do many audits for companies. They send me to do second-party audits, and I also do some audits for the military, for suppliers. And in most of the, 90% of the organizations that I go do audits for are already third-party certified. So they have their certificate to show they have passed an audit well enough to be able to receive a certificate. And yet I often find deviations and nonconformities that are striking. And the reason, one of the major reasons for this is I identify that many of the auditors who are great people doing their job but not doing it well enough are missing things because they're not asking the right questions, and because they are mostly involved in doing an inspection. And I call this little webinar "Show Me, Tell Me," or "Tell Me, Show Me" the difference between inspection and auditing. And I just a few days ago, I was delivering training at an organization, and the CEO wanted to speak to the employees and give them a little pep talk. So she stood up in front of all the employees and said, "I want to congratulate you guys. We just passed a wonderful audit. One of our most important customers came to audit us, and you guys did a great job in preparation. And I want to especially thank blah blah for working double shifts to get the plant clean. And everybody worked so hard to get the plant ready for the audit." And I was saying to myself, I can't listen to this. I mean, this is crazy. You can't say what you're saying. What I want to hear from you is saying, "I want to congratulate you all for being such great employees, for keeping our plant in a state of perpetual preparedness to the extent where our customers can come visit us whenever they want, and we never have to prepare anything." Because if the auditor comes into a plant and the plant has prepared for the audit, if the auditor is not doing an audit but doing an inspection, they'll miss 99% of what's to be seen. So, what is an audit? This is the textbook definition: systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining objective evidence, evaluating it to determine the extent to which criteria are fulfilled. Now, pay attention that what we're describing here is a process, and the process has 3 stages. The first stage is obtaining objective evidence. That's the part where we collect evidence. It does not mean anything until we move on to stage 2, which is evaluating it. And then there's no point in doing that if we don't move on to stage 3, which is to determine the extent to which criteria are fulfilled. This is, in my opinion, very similar to going to the doctor for a checkup. So if we go to a doctor for a checkup, especially if it's routine checkup, not because we're sick, not because we don't feel well, because it's time to have our routine annual physical, then what's going to happen is we're going to be having an audit. The doctor is going to ask us questions, many, many questions about how we feel, about our lifestyle, about what we do, and we're going to answer as truthfully as we can. Because if we lie to the doctor, and sometimes we feel like we want to, we're not doing anything good for ourselves. And then once and then even if we did lie, and sometimes we do a little bit, like how you've been doing exercise. Yeah, I'm exercising 3 times a week. Yeah, right. Maybe once. The doctor will move on to the next stage, which is taking objective evidence. That is evidence that cannot be, that is not hearsay or not what you're being told, but what you actually can verify by listening, by tapping, by taking samples, by taking pictures, by attaching us to machinery and getting a picture of our health by putting together many, many little pieces of a puzzle. That's what an auditor does. You go into an organization, you ask questions, you listen to the answers. You do not take the answers as truth, but you listen to them. And then you start looking at things and going deeper in and deeper, and you listen to more answers and you ask more questions. And as you go through this process, you put together the pieces of the puzzle, what the evidence is telling you. So I may see during an audit a dumpster that is overflowing. That's an objective evidence of a finding that I can write in my report. But it has less meaning than the combination of findings that there is a dumpster that's overflowing and there is a rise in customer complaints because of insect infestation, flies. And that makes less of an impact when I add those 2 findings with a third finding that I've also seen that there are gaps under the doors. And I can add on to that a finding that the employee training on hygiene has not been done on time, and now we're getting a picture that's telling us a story, which is what the auditee is paying us to do as auditors, to try to diagnose what's going on. Now, in this little slide, I put up a picture of a veterinary doctor, because I think that the analogy between an auditor and a doctor is even closer if we're talking about a veterinarian, because animals, like many organizations at the time of an audit, tend to hide their weaknesses and their illnesses. They'll make it look good for the audit. Because in the nature, if you show your weakness, you're in trouble. So we've been conditioned throughout evolution as animals to hide our weaknesses, not to show them. So it takes more expertise from the doctor to circumvent those the protection that the auditee is trying to put up in order not to be seen in their weakness. So it's sort of like a game. It's a challenge to try to get underneath and find out what's really happening. So it's a challenge that takes the expertise. Now the checkup is not supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be, nobody's supposed to have fun while the people are sticking fingers in you and poking you and stabbing you. But you realize the importance of it. Audits are not supposed to be fun. They're supposed to be rewarding in that they give you insight into the extent of your health, and then allow you to improve, which is why they're so important. Now, as I've stated before, an audit is not an inspection. I just want to make a point that an inspection comes from the Latin word spectare, which means to see, whereas audit comes from the Latin word audire, which means to hear. So inspectors look at stuff. Auditors listen to things. Mostly people talking and saying things and answering questions. So auditing is more of a questioning exercise, less of seeing things. Of course, we do throughout an audit, we combine the two as we go along. And this is why I call this presentation, Show Me, Tell Me. I want to see, I want to hear. I want to see, I want to hear, and we go through this. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. What you see on the left here is the Deming Cycle of Continual Improvement, PDCA. Pat yourself on the back if you're familiar with it. Kick yourself if you're not, and do homework as soon as this is over and read about it. The Deming Cycle of Continual Improvement is the basis for all management systems. And what it says in short is that organizations who strive for excellence have to define who they are, what they are, what their mission statement is, what they believe in, what are their values. And from that, they derive their policy. And from their policy, they derive their goals and their targets. And then they sit down and plan how to achieve that. And that's the P of the PDCA cycle. They plan and plan and plan and plan, putting together a plan. This is what we're going to do. The outcome of the plan is our total management system, which has all of our procedures, our work instructions, our recipes, our setups, our work instructions. Everything that we plan to do is in our plan. And then as soon as we're ready, we just go do exactly what we planned. So everybody who is involved in doing stuff should be doing what was planned and nothing else, nothing less and nothing more. And then if we planned perfectly, which we never do, but if we plan perfectly, and if we did exactly what we planned, the outcome will be exactly what we wanted to achieve. Now, because Deming is a genius, he knows that this is never, ever going to happen because nobody can make a perfect plan and nobody can do exactly what was planned. But we must be able to identify what's going on, the gaps, the deficiencies, which is why we need a check. And there are many, many checking processes that are that we use in a management system, but the most valuable one, the one that gives us most insight, is the inspection-audit. What do we check? Well, the obvious is what I'm showing you here. There's a picture here. You see a gloved hand holding a thermometer testing the temperature of the salads. Just last week, I did an audit for a customer who was using catering services. The catering, this industrial kitchen was making food for between 1,000 and 2,000 people a day, and they'd been having some issues. And they asked me to pop in and do an audit and try to find the underlying causes. And of course, everything looked pretty good when I got there because, the doctor's coming to do an audit. So there's a protocol. It says that the temperature of the salad that's in the cold serve station must be less than whatever degrees. So what do I do on in the field? What do I do on site? What is my job? Well, many auditors will be tempted to test the temperature. Show me what the temperature is. Okay, I'm going to make it right. I'm going to give me a thermometer. Some auditors, you actually walk around with a thermometer, and that's great. I don't. I asked the organization to give me one of theirs, but I don't care what the temperature is. I really, really don't care what the temperature is. Not that I don't care. Of course I care what the temperature is, but not as an auditor. As an inspector, I want to know what the temperature is because that's what I'm doing. I'm inspecting. I'm looking. But I don't, as an auditor, what I want to know is how often they test the temperature, what they've set as temperature limits, where they get those limits from, who does the testing, what training have they received, how aware are they of the importance, what do they do with the deviations, how do they react to them, and how do they analyze deviations? That's what I'm interested in as an auditor. So what am I checking? Well, first of all, I'm going to check that they're actually doing what they planned. So, okay, it says that you must test the temperature of the cold salads once every hour. That's your protocol. I read the procedure. Okay, show me. And they'll show me a record that every hour on the hour there's a result for the temperature. And okay, and I'll write in my report. It was observed that there's a record showing that temperature, blah, 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 blah. So I have verified that there is a record proving that they did what they planned. And I can do this for anything. For anything that's written in the procedure, I can verify that they're doing what they planned or that there's evidence building up to show they're doing what they planned. I do want to stress that it is sometimes even more important to see if what we planned is the right thing. And I'm going to go into that in a second. So So just to go through some technical issues that are really, really important. Desk audit is usually a dialogue. So a desk audit, we're asking a manager questions about how they've planned their system, what are the results, a lot of tell me, show me, tell me, show me, going into records, asking questions, follow-up questions, done one-on-one. I do want to stress, and this sometimes is overlooked, that a field audit is usually a trialogue. So in the field audit, there is one auditee and one subject of the audit. We never, in inspections, we will inspect and walk around. We don't need a trialogue. We don't need 3 people in an inspection. An inspector walks around. They don't need anybody. They're looking at things, talking to people, they're inspecting. An auditor is walking around the field with an accompanying auditee. The person who is in charge of that, who is the owner of that process, is the one being audited, not the employee, never the employee. Employees are not audited. They're not an auditee. The auditees are the managers, the decision makers, the process owners. So I will go to a packaging line with the shift manager or the operations manager or the line manager, whatever manager is owning that process, and I'll talk to them. And incidentally, I will also interview the employee. This is so important that I actually, when I arrive at an audit arena, I stage the audit so that the process owner and the employee are standing next to each other, and I'm standing in front of both of them and talking to them both. And I will say at the beginning of this little conversation, "Hi, my name is David. I'm so glad you could take a few minutes to stop your work and talk to me. Here, why don't you stand next to whoever? I want to ask you guys a few questions." When I do that, what we're getting is, first of all, the employee who may be very, very anxious of this situation where his manager and an external auditor or somebody else in the organization is doing an internal audit are coming to ask them questions. Now this person is intimidated. But if I am auditing both of them, there goes the intimidation. Now we're on the same side. We're both being audited. Actually, I made me feel really good about this as an auditee, as an employee. And it is not only a psychological staging of the event. It's really, really important because I'm going to be asking questions of the employee, and the employee is going to be answering me. But every once in a while, I'm going to turn to the process owner and ask the process owner a follow-up question. So, for instance, if I see an employee has an earring, I'll say, "Oh, I love your earrings. I thought that was forbidden in food manufacturing facilities. What is your policy?" And I'm talking to the employee. And the employee will then revert back to me and say, "Oh, well, it's we wear watches, and I don't have a bracelet, but we're allowed to have earrings if they're under my cap." I said, "Well, thank you." And then I'll turn to the person's direct employer and say, "Do you agree? Is that your policy? Or maybe we misunderstood what's going on here?" And then they'll have to answer. Now it's their turn. And they may say, "No, it's clear policy that we don't allow earrings even under head covering." And then I'll say, "Okay, well, it's obvious that this little regulation is not being fully met. So we'll have to look into that a little bit later." But I'm done with the employee. I'm not going to start educating the employee as an auditor. It's not my job. It's my job to talk to the to get insight with the process owner. How is it that happened? So, that's why it's important for us to have this trialogue. And I won't even write down the name of the worker being audited or being interviewed. It's not relevant. I don't want them to go back and punish this person, or that person is not the issue at all. So, the way this little conversation will go is done at 2 levels. Level number 1 is we're going to look at the actual fulfillment of the requirements. Are we doing what we planned? This is the check, the Deming check, doing what we planned. So what is the requirement? I'm asking you. I'm supposed to know it as the auditor. So tell me what the requirement is. I will verify that it's in compliance now. I'll ask the person, is it in compliance now, the requirement? And then I'll ask, how is its compliance verified by you over time. So right now, in the inspection part of our visit, I have inspected it to be in compliance. That's fine. The chances of me finding a non-compliant finding in a requirement during an audit is slim, especially if they prepared for the audit. So I must ask, how is its compliance verified by you over time? How do you know that it's always being compliant? And this is a question for the manager. And what do you do when you identify non-compliance? Tell me, and then I'll ask. And then now I'm auditing. The next level of questioning bears on the effectiveness, and I'll start out by asking, what is the requirement? That's the same. But then I'll ask, why did you decide on that requirement? Which is a question that must be asked of the process owner or the decision maker, less relevant to the employee. I may ask the employee, do you know why that is a requirement? That's a really good question. And if the person is unaware of the reason behind it, there will be a nonconformity because it's a requirement for awareness. But I really want to know what went on behind the scenes when that requirement was decided upon. And there must be an answer. If the auditee does not know the answer, why do you decide that requirement, then that's a nonconformity. Because the plan has to be based on something. It's not good enough just to say, that's the way we've always done it. I don't know. He may say, I'm not sure. I can find out. Okay, let's find out. But somebody has to know. Now, there aren't many possibilities where requirements come from. Either they're external requirements or internal requirements. If they're external requirements, then they have to be identified and incorporated into the business. If they're internal requirements, we have to know where they're coming from. So we're going to go to that. I'm going to skip to that in a second about the internal and external requirements. We ask, why did you design that requirement? So question number 2, why did you design that requirement? Question number 3, how do you verify that it's effective? Which is a really important question that a lot of auditors refrain from asking. You must ask this question. Not every single thing that you ask, you should be asking, how do you verify? But every once in a while, add on to your checklist, how do you verify that it's effective? Because it's not going to be on the checklist, that question. Your checklist as an auditor has what the requirements are and verify that it's being done as required. Nobody's asking, how do you verify that that's effective? I once was in a situation that was absurd. I was auditing with a team of auditors. This is when I was a third-party auditor, a very large government organization that does research. They had ISO 9001 and 14001, and they had, at that time, it was still OSHA's 18001, which has now become 45001. So it wasn't a food safety audit; it was a quality audit, integrated with safety and employee safety and environmental care. But the same principles still apply. And I audited the process that's called calibration or equipment verification of accuracy. You all familiar with that, I'm sure. And I was presented with an unbelievably elaborate and well-managed system of calibration. The company had over 200 measuring devices, some of them pretty sophisticated. And every single measuring device was either verified for accuracy or calibrated every 3 months on the day. Perfectly precise. Everything was maintained in files. Everything was recorded on an Excel sheet. The guy in charge of it was a full-time employee in charge of instrument accuracy. That was his job. And he, over the years, every time he met an auditor, was praised and praised and praised for the way he does his job. And now here comes David Rosenblatt, a new auditor, and I'm going to meet this guy, and he's ready to show me the time of my life, and he's showing me all the measuring devices, and everything's perfect. He's waiting for me to try to find something that is not on time or not precise, and of course I can't, and I don't want to, and I understand immediately that this company, this specific process is in 100% control. Well, I asked the auditee, the guy in charge of this process, the process owner, why did you decide that every 3 months everything has to be calibrated or verified? And how is that effective? And he did not have an answer. I shook his world. He was not a very happy auditee following that question. But it was really important for the organization that somebody finally asked it, because this is a government organization. I mean, it could have been anyone, any organization. But I'm paying for this. They were spending thousands and thousands of dollars on something that need not be done at all, and nobody ever asked the question, why did you decide? What, I mean, if there's a reason, fine, but there's got to be a reason. And the CEO of this organization was very, very pleased that they had chosen our organization to do their audit, because he was not in any position to compromise on quality at all. But he also was in a position to throw money around when it need not be thrown, when it may be spent. So just an example that an auditor must ask questions, sometimes that are uncomfortable for the auditee, but are very valuable for them. So how do you verify it's effective, and what do you decide on the requirement? Not every single question, every single time, but every once in a while, make sure that's part of the audit, because that is not included in any inspection ever. And what do you do when you identify it's not effective? Of course, show me your corrective action. Now, I want to talk a little bit about follow-up questions. Most observations of nonconformity are the manifestation of underlying cause. So, and you have a great graphic here. Boom, there you go, the tip of the iceberg proverb. So, if we see an observation and this is a part of our inspection, the audit must find out what's going on. How is this possible? Without a follow-up question, the reply to most nonconformities will be, and this, what I mean is, well, I'll give you an example in a second. The employees were retrained, procedure was updated, problem was corrected. So let's say I saw that, and then I was doing a plant audit, and I see that there's no soap in the soap dish at the exit of the toilet. So common finding in food safety audits that should not be. Well, if I say, oh, I see there's no soap here. Yes, no soap. Okay, so I'm going to write that in my report. It was identified at the exit of the bathroom. There was no soap in the soap. Blah blah blah. The answer will be the problem was corrected. If I see an employee smoking when they're not supposed to be smoking, and I make a note of that, then they'll write the employees were retrained. If I see that somebody was supposed to have tested a metal detector every 2 hours, and instead they were doing it every 4 hours, and I write that in my report, then they'll write, thank you for the observation. The procedure has been updated. Blah blah blah. That's not going to do anything. None of these will drive improvement. Any finding that indicates a deviation from procedure is a symptom of an underlying disease. This is going back to the medical terms. So, if you go to the doctor with a nosebleed, the last thing you want the doctor to do is stick cotton up your nostrils to stop the bleeding. Well, maybe it's the first thing you want, but you don't want to then say, you're fine now, you're not bleeding anymore, so I did my job as a doctor, I cured you, bye-bye. My nose is not supposed to be bleeding. Something's wrong with me. Find out. Ask the questions. Take samples. Understand what's happening. So good auditing technique allows us to identify the first 2 tiers of the underlying cause. Now, I want to make it perfectly clear that in my opinion, it is not the auditor's job to do a root cause analysis. That is the responsibility of the auditee. But I do think that a good auditor will drill down 2 levels lower than the finding. I call this a 2-tier approach. So the first 2 tiers of the underlying cause. So I see somebody smoking when not supposed to smoking, or I see a form that has not been filled out, or I see and I observe something that I've seen. It's an observation. I've inspected and seen something. I'm going to ask questions to get 2 levels down, and I'm going to leave it at that, because I can keep going down, but that's not my job. So tier 1 can usually be classified into 1 or 2 possible causes. Either the requirement was not defined as part of the food safety management plan, or it's not been implemented. So 1, the requirement was not defined. I just recently told you I was doing an audit for a company that's doing a commercial kitchen. This is an illustration. This is not a picture I took during the audit. But what you see here is a CCP. It's a critical control point. It is where the fruit and vegetables are sanitized to prevent or to eliminate pathogenic bacteria and viruses and parasites from the produce coming from the field. At the time of the audit, I asked them, tell me about the calibration of the dosing mechanism that decides how much chlorine is going to be added to the water going into the basin where sanitation is being done. How often do they do that? And the answer was, well, we really don't do any calibration. We just trust that it's fine, which is a nonconformity, in which case I asked the follow-up question, well, what does your procedure say? They said we don't have a procedure for that. So that's a requirement that was not defined. It's not anybody misbehaving. It's not anybody who's not doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's just nobody's supposed to be doing it at all. But it's still a nonconformity. So that's the first tier. The first tier is that the requirement is not defined. But now I'm going to go down to tier 2. Ask why. And there are only two possibilities. And I ask, are there mechanisms for identifying and integrating external requirements? Because one possibility is that there's an external requirement for that. Is there an external requirement? For instance, if they have ISO 22000, there is a specific clause in the standard requiring you to verify the accuracy of measuring devices at CCPs. So it's easy. And if you're working according to FSMS, FDA, or whatever, so it's an external requirement. So you missed it. Where's your mechanism for identifying external requirements? Or if it's not an external requirement, but it's still wrong, I still know it's bad. Well, I can't make things up as an auditor. I can't say, I think you should be doing blah, blah. I can't do that. If I don't have an external requirement, but what I can do is ask about the risk assessment. Is there a risk assessment to identify internal requirements? Because it's not external, it should be internal. How did you miss this? I'll give you an example. Let's say that they said that they calibrate it once every quarter. Well, okay, that's fine. They're meeting the external requirement. But I'm wondering how come they're not doing that every single day? Because what happens if once in a quarter you find out that your dosing mechanism was off? Well, how long have you not been sanitizing your vegetables? So that should be a daily verification, but it's not in the external requirement. So I'm not going to say, I want you to do that. I'm going to say, in your risk assessment, have you identified the risk? That specific scenario that maybe between calibrations, your equipment will lose its accuracy and you won't know about it. How have you identified that risk? Let's say no, well then that's the second tier. That's the nonconformity. Okay, that's the second tier. Now, if the defined requirement was not met as required, there is a requirement, but they haven't done it. And I'll give you another example of the same audit. The same audit was last week, so it's fresh in my mind. I observed an employee handling raw meat and finished product with the same gloves. It was a frying station. He was putting meat into the fryer, into the deep frying. It was fried chicken. So he's putting raw chicken into the fried chicken, and then he was removing it and putting it on to be served with the same gloved hand, causing a severe violation and a hazard of cross-contamination from pathogenic bacteria from the raw chicken. I immediately stopped the work and intervened, but then I asked the employee, do you know about this requirement? And he said, no. And I asked the shift manager, who was the process owner, he said, of course, it's in our procedures. So this is a case where the procedures are okay, but they're not being implemented, in which case I don't want to stop here. I have a first tier of insight, knowing that there is a requirement not being implemented. I want to know why. So I'm going to ask a follow-up question, and I'm going to get one of three possibilities. Okay? Either there's lack of competence, in other words, the person doesn't know or cannot fulfill this requirement, or there's lack of willfulness, the person doesn't feel like it or doesn't think it's important enough, or there was just a mistake. He may have just forgotten or made a mistake. There's only those three possibilities. I do recommend seeing some of my previous webinars on human behavior and behavioral-based food safety to get a little more insight into the root causes of non-compliance. But that's the three of them. So I don't have to now go deeper. I don't have to understand. If I understand that this person says, all I have to ask is, did you know? As soon as he says, no, I had no idea, that's my observation. Now the organization go back and not tell me that we retrain the employees, but ask themselves about effectiveness of training. Okay, in this specific audit, it was unbelievable because when I did look at the training records, they had taken all 40 employees and trained them for 60 minutes in the dining room without a presentation, without anything in writing, without any written examination. And they went within the 60 minutes of their training, they went over 16 major food safety subjects that were on their agenda. And every single employee signed, even those who don't know the language. And this is an observation showing that organization does not have a food safety culture. They don't really care. They care about getting their forms in order and have everything signed so that whenever the inspector comes to look at everything signed, that's why they need an auditor to ask the right questions and to be able to make connections. There was an actual serious hazard to human health going on that was overlooked. So that's a tier 2. So to sum this up, when I see a nonconformity, I will drill down 2 levels. One, I'll find out, has the organization identified the requirement at all? And if not, is it because it's an external requirement that they failed to identify and implement? Or is it not an external requirement and did they fail to identify the need for it in their risk assessment? If the case is that there is a clear requirement and has not been fulfilled, well, I'll ask a question to find out, is it because people don't know or aren't capable? Is it a competence issue? Do people know and are capable and they just don't feel like it, or they don't understand why it's that important? Or did somebody just make a mistake? In any one of these 3 cases, the coordination must go back and ask themselves how this could have been prevented, because it is unthinkable that in the food industry, people will become ill or die because a requirement was not met. And I want to say something. Well, I'll say it. I'll do that when I'm finished because I have a few minutes left. And when I finish, I'm going to say something really important that I think every one of us should go back home with and think about, especially those who are doing audits and also those who are being audited. Okay. When we find a situation where there is a violation of behavior, besides asking the direct tier 2 question, trying to identify where that's coming from, it is our responsibility as auditors to ask, how did that go unnoticed? That's what I call indirect tier 2. Because people can make mistakes, people can forget, people can sometimes be unmotivated. It's not supposed to happen, but there must be something in place, ongoing something, that will identify that will notice it. It doesn't make sense that I had to come do an audit for this organization to identify that they're handling raw and finished goods with the same glove. Somebody should have seen that, and that is where I want them to focus on their preventive action and on their corrective action. That's where I want to see them focus on the corrective action. And how did we miss that? What went wrong in our controls? Finally, I want to introduce a concept that I think is really, really important. And I have mentioned this in a previous webinar that I did a few years ago about auditing, and I call it verification of verification. Because actually an audit is a verification tool. So auditors verify. We verify that what we think is being done is actually being done. We verify that the results we want to actually obtain, we are actually obtaining, blah, blah. That's what we're doing. And one of the things that an organization must be doing ongoing all the time is to do verification, not audit verification, but ongoing verification. the auditor must verify the verification. So always ask about verification. I mentioned that in the beginning when I said the question is, how do you know that you're in compliance all the time? That's sort of asking that question. So routine verification actually should be sampled and audited. So look at the routine verification. So for instance, if somebody's swabbing for microbial, for environmental swabbing, that's a routine verification. If somebody is doing auditing brittle plastic and glass, that is ongoing verification. If we're doing examinations and asking employees questions after a training, that is verification. Well, these routine verifications should be looked at and audited. And the questions you want to ask, show me how it's done, show me how you verify, show me the records of the verification, show me how you react to deviations, which is what I care about, and mostly show me the data analysis. So this is we're building a building here, and the bottom floor is how it's done, the records, but the penthouse is the data analysis. And one of the most unfortunate food safety incidents and one of the most troubling in the last decade was the Maple Leaf incident. You should be familiar with this incident. It's very tragic. 22 people lost their lives and the organization who was in charge, who was making the products, were a fantastic organization. They still are. Maple Leaf Foods is unbelievably a great company, and really everybody there was doing their job. There was no bad guy in Maple Leaf. And when you have a food safety incident with people dying, it's like you want there to be a bad guy. You want to know that something broke down that we can put our finger on, but when nobody did anything wrong, that's when we're really troubled. As an auditor, I'm always I always have this anxiety that I'm going to miss something, especially in good organizations, that there's a blind spot that we're not seeing. And one of the ways to see these blind spots, and there are blind spots, I assure you, one of the ways to do this is to look at the verification records and data analysis. There's a great paper that you can obtain. It's online. It is the report of independent investigator of the 2000 listeriosis outbreak in Canada, Maple Leaf incident, worth reading. It was done by Sheila Wetherill, a private investigator, in great detail. And one of the things that she said that struck me as an auditor, I use this. I remember this all the time, every audit. What was missing was the big picture. So although data were being collected, they were not being analyzed by the plant or company headquarters to detect trends over time. Had such analysis been conducted, the emergence of listeria on a regular basis would have become obvious much sooner. What she is referring to the fact that the company was doing environmental sampling, and like every organization in the world, they were finding every once in a while deviations to which they reacted as required. But we assume that when we do monitoring and we do verification and we see deviation, we assume that it is random. So our reaction is do it over again, listen better, and then retest, and now we're fine. So we got ourselves back on track. We assume that it's random, but sometimes it's not. And Maple Leaf, it was not random. There was a pattern that could have been seen, and it was seen in the investigation, but not prior to it. Had the organization been looking at the numbers, telling them a story, then they would have been saved from this. Probably. We don't know. We'll never know. And I always ask in my audits, show me what you're doing with your data. Any data being collected should not be just sitting on a shelf. Maybe it's telling you a story. Maybe it's not. Probably it's not, but it may be. Before I open the floor to questions, I want to say something. Listen, sometimes I feel like I am blamed behind my back, maybe, or even my face, that I'm too strict, that I don't, that you have to know where to compromise. As an auditor, you have to be flexible. You have to understand. You have to take into consideration of the circumstances, the infrastructure, the employees. Sometimes trying to make me feel that I am overdoing it, and you got to be strong as an auditor. We are doing a job. We cannot accept that. And I want to say something. all requirements in the world that organizations must fulfill, do they all make sense? Are they all justified? Of course not. But you know what? Most of them are. The vast majority of things that we're required to do are justified. And no organization in the world has a right to deviate from requirement, especially if it's their own risk assessment. Which is why I have no problem looking an auditee in the eye and saying, that is the requirement. I will not accept a deviation. I will not accept a compromise. We're talking about human life. Are we exaggerating? Of course we're exaggerating, because the human race, our species, over the last 100 years, has outsourced its food to a small number of people in the world. I think the last number I read that was published by the WHO, that I think 3% of the planet is making food for the rest of the remaining 97%. And by doing that, one person now has the power to affect thousands. A recent pet food case that was just published, the final ruling on it, not the final ruling, a ruling to consolidate court cases. One employee made one mistake and caused damage to hundreds and hundreds of consumers, including death, and we know what the mistake was. That's unacceptable. So, as an auditor, we have a role to be tough. We have a role not to compromise, not to play along with the, winking your eye a little bit, no, not and never. And if you're not that kind of person, don't do an audit. That's what I have to say for you. So that's my hour. If you have any questions, I'm back on. You can see my face. Can you?
Yes, we can. Just stop the slides there. Okay. Ivan said it. Phenomenal presentation. So fantastic. Thank you. Right. Questions, ladies and gents? Anybody got a question for David? Let's have a look. By the way, Mike Tsai shared the listeriosis report in the sidebar, the link to it. That was good.
That's pretty efficient.
Yeah. Any questions for David? Lots of thank yous. Right, okay. Baba Tunde. No, sorry, that isn't a question.
There was somebody asking, as we're going through, I was asking about how to get people to be more willful in their behavior. And that's a big question. We have a lot of resources on IFSQN on behavioral-based food safety. Just look into that. And there's a lot of information there. A lot of things can be done.
Okay. I can't see any questions. Yes, you do. Yes, you do receive a copy of the presentation by email.
Okay.
Just all thank yous, Dave.
Monitor food safety culture. There was somebody asking. There are ways to do that. At the end of the presentation that you can download, you have my email. Or you can email through Simon, and I have some resources on that, so feel free. I'll be happy to share.
Irina, can you see that one, David? Regarding risk assessment of food fraud, is it acceptable to group ingredients, or must it be done separately for each ingredient?
Okay, good question. It is acceptable to group ingredients if you can, if you validate that there's a justification for that. So if you're receiving from one supplier 3 different spices, you can do a food fraud, but it's acceptable. But it has to be valid. In my experience, when we talk about regular food safety, it's more acceptable. When we're talking about food fraud, usually not. Because the way to I forgot my word, If you're going to falsify food, there's a word. What's the word for falsifying food? There's a word for that in English.
Fraud.
Yeah, but if you're going to, I forgot the word. Anyway, if you're going to intentionally adulterate, thank you, food, you're going to be doing it for specific ingredients. So if it's going to be honey, you're going to be doing it to honey, or olive oil, or paprika, or saffron. So the grouping of ingredients together in a fraud risk assessment is less acceptable than regular food safety, which is pathogenic bacteria or whatever. But it is possible if you validate it.
Okay, what do you do if senior management commitment isn't encouraging?
You bring in somebody who is very persuasive to talk to them. I'm serious. That's one of the things I do. QA managers say, I want you to talk to my management. I want you to scare them, and I do, and it works. I mean, you just have to talk business, because food safety is good business.
Okay, Ian, as a government inspector, I get FBOs asked to have me removed as an auditor when NCRs of major nature is found. What do you feel is a response to this?
I'm not sure I understand the question. This is a government inspector auditor being removed, asking not that we don't want him anymore because he's too tough?
Yes.
Well, it's the government role to say, deal with it.
Yeah.
We're going to send him to you over and over again until you learn how to operate properly.
Yeah.
Unless there's a personal issue that they want to, maybe sometimes it caused them to feel uncomfortable, or maybe there were words that were not friendly. But if it's a professional issue, then deal with it. The government should be strong enough to say, this is our inspector and we trust him.
Is the auditee only responsible for ensuring implementation?
Yes. If I understand the question, yes. Auditee meaning not a specific person, but an organization.
Okay, Dawn, what do you recommend to steer an auditor during an audit if they go out of scope and or use their own interpretation of the standard, which is different than generally accepted?
Very politely remind the auditor that the role is to verify the compliance of a specific requirement. That is the definition of an audit. And you appreciate their insights. Be very polite, but be very clear in saying, I need you to audit what you're here to audit, and not go and give me your own interpretation of things. Be very careful though, because if it's if this is a government official, be careful. You don't want to get on their bad side. I mean, you're allowed to, but try to be as more smart than right.
Okay, Alex, could the bluebell listeriosis outbreak have been prevented by auditing?
Alex, I don't know. I'm not familiar. I know I'm familiar with the outbreak. I'm not familiar with the investigation behind it. So if I had more information, I might know. The cases that I mentioned are cases that I have presented and I have studied. So I know what went on behind the scenes. In this case, I don't know.
Okay. Right, I'm at the top now. I've picked a few questions, but can you give some examples how external requirements can be demonstrated by the company?
Usually, I assume that Katerina is asking how the company shows the auditor that they have identified their external requirements. Usually, there should be a process in place called compliance, a compliance process, or identifying external requirements. There is a clause in ISO 22000 that requires that, and usually it's some kind of Excel sheet that has a concentration of all requirements that are required from the organization, legal requirements. And then there should be some kind of they should be able to show the auditor that they have some mechanism in place for learning about new legislation. So there are websites that share new legislation. There are companies that give that service that you can sign up for legislative updates. So they should be able to show the auditor that they're on this, that it's up to date, that it's being managed. So that's all we require, and it should be done. And they should be also a very good idea. It's not a requirement, but a good idea is to have compliance audits, which are not really audits, they're more compliance inspections, where you specifically look only at the level of compliance with external government requirements.
Okay, as if human error as a root cause is acceptable. If yes, then what should be the corrective action in that case?
Excellent question, and I have an answer for that. Any time where human error can cause a nonconformity should be identified as part of the risk assessment. So I will go back with I expect the organization to go back to the risk assessment and see where they missed that scenario. That specific hazard should have been identified and evaluated and a control put in place. Usually we recommend that if the root cause is identified to be human error, there should be a poka-yoke solution. Poka-yoke, the Japanese term for foolproofing. There should be a foolproof solution that engineers out the possibility of the person making a mistake in the first place. That would be the corrective action. Changing the way it's done instead of yelling at the person and saying you better pay attention next time more. Doesn't work like that. People don't do that. So it could be, for instance, a barcoding situation, a checklist, a barrier, another pair of eyes, something that is being added on to that to prevent error.
Okay. A couple of people have asked this. A specific, which areas of a food processing facility would you recommend to be tested for listeria as part of the environmental sampling program, and how often would you recommend that these tests be conducted?
Well, I wouldn't dare answer that question in a webinar. That has to be the result of a risk assessment, a specific risk assessment done on site with professionals. It would depend on so many factors, and it is actually part of the FSMS requirement for preventive controls to do a risk assessment to try to find out exactly the answer to that question. So it is so specific per plant that I wouldn't dare answer it on here.
Alex, if auditors are capable, should they give advice on fixing non-compliances or just identifying non-compliances?
That's a good question. Internal auditors, definitely, but not during the audit. This is in my opinion, it's a cultural issue, in my opinion. So I don't want people to do what I'm saying, but telling them to do just because I'm their auditor. I want to detach that. I want them to deal with it. If it's an internal audit and I'm part of the team, and after the audit we're sitting down to figure out what could be done better, then I can give my advice, which would be valid and would make sense. For external auditors or second-party auditors, that's not acceptable. It's not their job to give advice. It actually causes a conflict of interest, because in some way the auditee may be tempted to take my advice, even though it may not be the best advice, just to make me happy. And I may be in conflict of interest if they chose not to take my advice and took somebody else's advice. So we don't put ourselves in that situation ever in second and third party audits. Only.
But auditees sometimes, in practice, they might be struggling practically to get a handle on something and say, I just really don't get this. Is it not even acceptable to say, well, in some organizations I've seen them do it like this, in some organizations?
Yeah, it's a fine line. It's a fine line. If you do it delicately, because you have to remember, auditors, when going from plant to plant and from company to company, you see practices that are proprietary and that belong to that, and you're not supposed to share that with anybody. Sometimes I will actually see a good practice in a company as an auditor, and I'll say, that's great. Have you thought to share this with the industry? And they'll say yes or no. And if they say yes, then I will encourage them to maybe show up at a food safety conference and talk about that solution, or write it up in a forum like the IFSQN and talk about their success to share it, because food safety is not a competitive issue. But if they don't plan on sharing that, then I'm not going to be the one to share it. So I may, but yeah, it's a good question.
Jeff Coombs, do you think the food safety teams do risk assessments as a group or individually?
If I understand the question, they must be done as a group. It's a requirement. It's called the food safety team.
Yes, indeed.
And because no one person has all the knowledge to identify all of the hazards in any one organization, so it must be multidisciplinary.
Okay. James Delamere, do you have any recommendations for, it's disappeared now, risk assessment information and/or tools?
That's a very broad question. No, I mean there are so many. There's so many tools out there for doing risk assessments. I personally think that the FSSC 22000 certification scheme requires tools that are include ISO 22000 are pretty advanced, but every organization builds their own tools. The only thing I can say that the thing that every organization should have a very clear system of identifying, evaluating, and controlling what we call, that's the golden rule of a risk assessment: identify, evaluate, control. And it's really, really important, no matter what tool you use, that there is no, that those three, we'll probably do a webinar on this one, because it's really important. Those three processes are disconnected from each other. So we identify without thinking about the evaluation, otherwise we'll miss stuff. And we evaluate without thinking about control, otherwise we'll evaluate wrong. So we keep them separate, which is why we do it on an Excel sheet in a room and not do it intuitively, because intuitively we bind these three things together simultaneously. So we must be able to separate them. So whatever you're doing, identify, and then evaluate, and then control.
Yeah. Okay. Some registrants have given ideas for tools, risk assessment tools there. I think we've actually done a previous webinar and did some different risk assessment tools as well, so I can send the link to that. Okay, we're quite a bit over, but it's been worthwhile, very informative, a great crowd. I've enjoyed it, and thanks very much, David.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you all for staying with us and being food safety champions. Great job. Thank you.
Okay, all there is to do now is to issue your certificate that you can download in the sidebar, and then yeah, just open that, follow that link, takes you to Dropbox, download your certificate and sign your name on it, and then you're good to go. Okay, thanks, ladies and gents.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice
Good weekend.
weekend. Bye, everyone.